Well, it looks like the annual debt ceiling fight, much like Thanksgiving or Veterans Day, is upon us. It's a tradition now with inter-party talks underway. Oh, and underway it is. Republicans, much like alcoholic fathers, stumbling around reprimanding a child for getting in the liquor cabinet, puff their chests and point fingers, shouting feel-good phrases like, "Fiscal responsibility is a must." All the while, on the other side, Democrats rant and rave about Wakanda gender studies and polar bear manicures or some such nonsense. Oh, it's just a wonderful time of year. The U.S. has already technically exceeded the relevant statutory limit, but extraordinary measures enacted by the Treasury Department have pushed the actual cliff off until June. Now, whatever one may actually think about this looming battle and how each party should play their political hands, let's set the record straight by rebuting the annoying, low-IQ, tired BS talking point among the lying drama queens on the left, namely that the 2017 Trump tax cuts are the real culprits in all of this. We've seen variations of this pretty obvious feeble spin by hysterical idiots like Elizabeth Warren, Chris Murphy, and of course everyone's favorite garbage disposal aficionado, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, just to highlight a few. You see, Democrats have been lying and ludicrously fear-mongering their Subaru driving base with these tax cuts and reforms for years now, and they evidently show no signs of stopping. Here's a few examples. Elizabeth Warren tweeted out the other day if Republicans hadn't spent nearly $2 trillion on the Trump tax cuts, and if they hadn't made it easier for rich people to cheat on their taxes, the U.S. would need a debt ceiling increase this year, or next year. Chris Murphy tweeted out, "You can't make this up. Republicans added $4 trillion to the debt with their tax cut for corporations and billionaires. Now they are refusing to allow Treasury to allow Treasury to pay back the loans unless Congress agrees to cuts to Medicare and Social Security." Chad Pergram tweeted out, from colleague Hillary Vaughn, Ocasio-Cortez, quote, "I think the largest contributor to the debt ceiling to our deficit has been the Trump tax cuts." Now comes the fun part, folks. We get to unpack some of this absolute nonsense piece by piece. So, if you happen to have one of those fence sitters in your life, you know, the one that constantly brings up the Trump tax cuts, you might want to pay special attention. Just for starters, Warren claims Republicans spent nearly $2 trillion on the Trump-era tax cuts. Tax cuts are not government spending. Tax cuts are allowing people to keep more of the money that they earned. Our earnings do not belong to the government. Warren is making a case in favor of her party's move to double the size of the Internal Revenue Service, or IRS, in the clown-worldly named so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Democrats were given an opportunity to write into their law a provision that this enormous expansion of America's tax collecting agency would not target anyone making less than $400,000 per year with its broadened auditing capacity, thanks to tens of thousands of new agents and employees. But they unanimously declined. Data shows that non-rich Americans are in fact disproportionately, they love that word, disproportionately hit with IRS audits and scrutiny. This will get a lot worse for a lot more people. No wonder Warren wants to pretend that this is just about holding rich tax cheats accountable, or whatever. You may have noticed in the tweets I read off earlier that Murphy doubles Warren's number on the cost of the tax cuts. But in reality, that just makes his point twice as wrong, now doesn't it? He frames the tax reforms and cuts as a gift to corporations and billionaires, their go-to favorite lefty boogeyman. But in reality, the tax cuts reduced average tax burdens across every single income group in America, with the overwhelming majority of taxpayers, especially in the middle class, receiving a tax cut. Wages finally meaningfully increased after the law was implemented. Disproportionately, they love that word, disproportionately benefiting working people. Okay, now most importantly, in response to the collective premise of all three tweets, after taxes were cut in 2017, the economy grew and revenue soared to all-time record levels. Yes, tax revenue increased. after taxes were cut. Blaming these tax reductions and reforms as heavily responsible, let alone primarily responsible, for America's deficit and debt problem is spectacularly wrong. This is yet another wonderful, beautiful example of how thoroughly, utterly idiotic the left is when it comes to anything to do with revenue or numbers in general. Again, incoming government revenue went up, hitting historical highs. Miss Warren, that means you had even more money to spend on frivolous, stupid things. And because of said Trump tax cut in 2017, to this day, new federal revenue records are still being set. Revenues are not the problem, folks. As we all know damn well, the out-of-control spending, much of it basically automatic at this point, is the problem. Now, most Republicans are unserious, let's say to be nice, about fixing this unsustainable problem. Nearly all Democrats deny the problem outright and insist upon making it much, much worse. Oh, and doing it as quickly as possible. The entirety of the left, much like a 16-year-old child receiving his first paycheck, are in a mad frenzy to spend your hard-earned tax dollars as quickly as possible. Never mind what it's on. We just need to spend it, and we need to spend it now. So yes, it is fundamentally dishonest to point the finger at the tax cuts while deeply distorting them as a serious driver of our national deficit and debt. Now, there are honest and fair-minded criticisms that the GOP deserves on this front, but the Democrats aren't in a position to prosecute them effectively because in nearly all cases, they've pushed for far more spending, far bigger deficits, and more aggressive denialism. So they resort to their lazy, fact-free fairy tales about the big bad Trump tax cuts for billionaires. Here's some actual nuance and intellectual honesty by Rich Lowry. This is his critique on Republicans. Quote, after a hiatus during the Trump years, Republicans are back in the mood for fiscal probity. It's very strange not to seriously pursue a deeply held goal when you have unified control of Washington, than to insist on trying to achieve much of it in one fell swoop when you barely have control of one chamber of Congress. This is the Republican pattern. It has been fundamentally driven by the fact that 2 Republican presidents in a row now have won the White House by effectively running against the fiscal conservatism of the congressional wing of the party. The problem is that Paul Ryan was right about the substance and Trump was right about the politics. And that dilemma, in a nutshell, is why the country's debt-to-GDP ratio is nearly 100% and is projected to keep climbing. Like the ne'er-do-well occasionally convinced to scrub up and show up to church on Sunday, the GOP experiences spasms of fiscal rectitude, followed by longer bouts of going along with the usual Washington practices of devil-may-care fiscal blowouts. The party is waging a generational effort, once every 10 years or so. It is showing great staying power, and between the times, it barely talks about the issue at all, unquote. In closing, as for the current debt ceiling standoff, I've been arguing that Republicans need to get on the same page with a simple, popular, realistic, modest, unified ask and plant their flag there. Now, whether they'll manage to do so is very, very much an open question. Most of this came by way of townhall.com. If you liked it, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment down below. There's a PayPal link in the description box, so please put $1 in the bucket on the way out the door. I'd like to thank everyone for all your donations. They're much needed and much appreciated. Now, with all that being said, we'll see you next time.
Come on, move. Move. Easy, easy.